Then we get cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency, and by this I'm just going to say Bitcoin, is really failing comprehensively, terribly on the privacy angle. And I've said this again.
We investigated the story and created this fascinating video for you after learning that Edward Snowden had mentioned in an interview that Bitcoin might fail on the privacy front. He made factual critique and talked about the way forward for crypto. Let's begin.
And people are like, oh, Taproot, look at what Taproot actually does. Taproot does not fix Bitcoin's privacy problem. And there's some arguments that it makes it worse by this sort of fragmented address space, making forensic sort of flow analysis easier, because this kind of wallet is using an ancient address. They sent a payment to this new person with a new form of address, right? But the change address went back to the old one. So even though there's one input, two outputs, you can tell one was a payment and one was a sort of a refund or a change event. Shouldn't be like that. There's no reason for it to happen. We see so many different privacy coins. Zcash, I have said repeatedly, really does the best in this space with their shielded transactions. The criticism is that like these transactions don't occur by default, which is valid. In my opinion, they should happen by default. There are other cryptocurrencies like Monero, privacy coin, which is having a lot of trouble being listed on exchanges broadly, which has sort of privacy by default, but it's a lower measure of privacy. They're just playing a shell game. And those shell games really don't last forever, particularly as technology does better and better. And we haven't seen legally tested in the kind of way that we want to see it done. But they're both great projects. And there are many, many other privacy coins out there. But like you said, we see exchanges starting to go, privacy, that's scary.
Making every transaction in the main chain private would be the only way to repair Bitcoin, according to Edward Snowden. According to him, making cryptocurrency private would make it perfect, as it is the original intention.
The idea cryptocurrency is private by design. And once you normalize that, it's fait accompli. And it's really frustrating, I think, for a lot of people in space that the core development team for Bitcoin has not prioritized this, because the longer they wait, the more obstacles are going to be put in place to prevent that from being the case. Right now, Bitcoin really can't be delisted by exchanges. And the sooner we take advantage of that, the better off we will be.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find so frustrating about working on policy around financial surveillance is that somehow everyone seems to just accept that the financial surveillance of the traditional banking system is totally normal, that it's necessary that banks turn over financial records to the government by default en masse.
And this was never the norm historically. A lot of this flew out of like September 11th with like counterterrorism financing, and like counterterrorism financing at like Bank of America. Like, we want terrorists to be sending financial flows over Bank of America, because then we know what they're doing. We know who it's going to. We can knock on their door and like we can blow up their house, right? The way we deal with these things is really crazy, because we structured these new policies and then panic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. But I think it's important. Actually, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. When did these things just start to change from this old paradigm things were in terms of what the government could get from banks and what they can get now?
So, back, one of the original cases around this type of financial surveillance was the Miller case back in the 1970s, where the Supreme Court looked at bank records under the Bank Secrecy Act, because this is all happening under the Bank Secrecy Act, and the way that was being collected, and said, well, look, since you're giving a third party, the bank, your financial data, they can turn that over. You don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that.
Because you don't own it, the bank owns it, right? It's no longer your record, it's the bank's record. So the government doesn't need a warrant or anything like that, because the bank can voluntarily provide it. That's what you're saying, right?
Right, exactly. Because you've shown it to the bank, suddenly you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in it. And of course, in the 1970s, you can understand where the third party doctrine came from, because the amount of information that you were showing to someone was I mean, minimal, right? Like the checks you're writing.
Your library card.
Right, exactly. And then you fast forward to today, and I actually think that if you brought this to the Supreme Court again, this would come out very differently, because we've seen in the last few years the Supreme Court chipping away at the third party doctrine and recognizing that today, if you have the same, if you have someone's financial records, the things that they're showing to third parties, it's a comprehensive picture of absolutely everything that they do, right? Their whole lives. And so I think this would turn out differently if it went up to the court today. But the thing that I find so weird here is that even cryptocurrency advocates will say, in responding to proposed regulations, things like, as long as you're just regulating cryptocurrency the same way as you're regulating traditional financial institutions, as long as the information that's being handed over about crypto transactions is the same, then that's okay. These are like well-known cryptocurrency advocates. And it's like, there's this stigma that if you support allowing financial transactions to be anonymous, you support money laundering and terrorism,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's strategic. I think if you asked a lot of these people privately, they would all say they hate it. They would all say it's a mistake. They would all say they don't do it. But at the same time, I think a lot of these guys are not comfortable being the first to break cover. And they're afraid of regulation, right? The problem with the cryptocurrency space at the largest scale today is the people who make these decisions have the biggest stake in the system. And the system has benefited from the fact that it has not been regulated out of existence, or there's no attempt to regulate it out of existence currently by the structures as exists today. And so they have become fantastically wealthy. And this puts a lot on the line, right? I'm not saying they have no principles. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying they realize how much value there is both for themselves and for everybody else who's bought into these systems by not rocking them. And it's important to remember that sometimes the boat can be bigger than the puddle. And right now, they're all afraid of being, capsized and drowned in the ocean. But there is, right now, they're in a puddle, and there's a rainstorm out there. And the puddle's getting bigger.
I sincerely hope you appreciated and took away something from this Edward Snowden interview on Bitcoin. We have other in-depth analyses of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, on our channel. Make sure you check it out here. Also, please subscribe and hit the like button. I'll see you on the next.